In UiPath, we have a lot of different for each loops. We have the for each row in Excel. We have the for each row in a data table. We have a normal for each. We have the cousin, a while loop. Then we have nested loops. This guide will teach you everything about for each in UiPath. You gotta promise me that you open up your own UiPath and do the things with me. In that way you will learn the most, and I promise you that you will become a for each expert after this video. So download the course materials from the link below and let's get started. The first for each activity that we will look at is the native Excel one in UiPath. It's called for each Excel row. I prepared a dataset which you can download by clicking the link in the description below. That will get you this Excel sheet. I placed mine in a folder on the desktop. You can do the same or another folder on your computer. The Excel file, that will look like this. It has 4 sheets, and the first sheet that we're going to use is the one called One Docs. It's a dataset of 4 columns: name, age, senior, and match. Senior and match are empty. We will get back to how we'll fill that in with our for each loop in a little while. Then we have a name and an age. Our mission for this first use case with the for each Excel row is to find out which one of these dogs is age 10 or older. Of course, we can see it with our eyes, that is Batwoman and Freya, but we will create it in UiPath. So go over to UiPath. Make sure you have the modern design experience enabled. So click Settings, click Design, scroll a little bit down and make sure Use Modern for New Projects is enabled like this. Then we can click Start. We create a new process by clicking Process. I will call mine Process for each loop, examples like this. Then I click Create with the default other settings. There you go. So I open up the main window and let me make UiPath Studio a bit larger so we can see what's going on. First, we want to have an Excel process scope. That is where we put all our Excel activities in when we use UiPath. So in activities, and in case your activities doesn't show up, it might look like this. Just go down here and click Activities. Then you'll find an Excel process scope like this, and we'll drag it in. Then we will need to define which file we are going to use, and again our file is downloaded here to our desktop in a folder, and it's called data xlsx. What you can do now is to press Shift right click like this, copy as path. If you just right click, then this copy as path is not there. Then we go back to UiPath. And again, please build these things with me. You will learn 10 times faster. So in activities, we'll find and use Excel file like this, and then we'll drag it in. Here we will just paste in our workbook path like this. We can see that we reference this workbook path as Excel. That's fine. Now we can start to iterate through these values. So we will use a for each Excel row as mentioned. So I go up here and I have a for each Excel row like this, and I drag it in. We can see here that we have a for each current row, and the current row is just a reference. We can call it whatever we want. You can see here I can just have it like this for each row, but I'll stick to for each current row. That's fine. That's just a reference. What this reference does is that this activity take each Excel row one by one. So it takes this row, this row, this row, and that. And then with the current row, that is a reference to the row that we're just in. So if we're here, the current row will be this. It's easy to understand, right? Another thing that we want to tick is the headers, because as we just saw, our Excel sheet has headers up here. Now we want to define the range. We can either define a specific range like some of the data or all the data, that is everything that's in the sheet. We'll take the sheet. So go to this in range field here, click the plus sign over here, Excel, and here we can select the sheets. I will select the docs sheet like this. There you go, UiPath automatically make the code for you. So now we're iterating through each Excel row over here. Now we can ask a question. That's usually why we want to do these for each loops. That is to ask questions, and then we can have our action based on the answer of that question. To ask a question, that is an if, or almost always. So we'll find an if in the activities and then we drag it in. As mentioned, it asks a question. That question always need to be answered with either true or false. So we write out a condition, or you can say a question, that can be answered with true or false. Click this show else, because if this condition is true, then we move to the then branch, and if this condition is false, then we move to the else branch and perform the actions here. So this condition is evaluated each time we go into it. And here we placed it in a for each Excel row. So whatever we put in here, we will evaluate every time we come here. That is 6 times. Let's write out a condition that checks if the dogs here are senior dogs, because then we want to place a yes here in the senior column. To do so, let us go back. So we want to reference whatever is in the current row and then the age column. So here, then I want to know what's in here in the age column. Then here, I want to know that this is 10. To do so, we start by referencing the right cell, and then we will convert that cell to an integer. To reference to the correct cell, press Control Space, that will enable the IntelliSense. Then scroll a little bit down to current row, press Tab, and there you go, you didn't have to write anything. Then I press dot, and then I'll say item, that is the column. I can say parentheses, and in quotation mark, I put in the name of my column I want to target. I want to target the age, so I say this. Now I want to convert this to an integer as mentioned. To do so, I'll use the cint convert to integer in front of this. So if I say, or I can again press the Control Space, I can press in cint, there you go. I press Tab. Now we just need the parentheses outside the current row item age. So start parentheses here, and in the end parentheses. So now we have converted the age of the current row to an integer. Then we can ask, is this age bigger than or equal to 10? To do so, we will just say bigger than or equal to 10, like this. So now we have a question that can easily be answered. It can either be true or false. If it's true, we want to go here and we want to write to the current cell. So if this is more than 10, we want to write yes here. That's all there is to that. So if I go back here, now I'll find the right cell. Like this. Make sure you pick the Excel one from up here and drag it in. And we want to write the cell whenever this is true. So we actually don't using the else branch, so I can click hide else here. It's a bit more easy to look at. So what do we want to write? That goes in here. Where do we want to write it? Goes in here. What do we want to write? I just want to write yes in the senior column. So what I will do here in quotation marks, because it's a string, I type in yes. Then we have a range. Where do we want to write? And because we use the native Excel activities in UiPath, simply just click the plus over here, take the current row, and now we can decide where we want to write. So this is done dynamically. Take the senior, because that's where we want to write. There you go, UiPath again has created the code for you. That's all there is to a for each Excel row activities. We can run our flow. I can click debug here. The flow will run, and in a few seconds it has ran. If I go to my Excel sheet, I can see that we actually created our automation successfully. That is, Batwoman and Freya is a senior. Nice work. Now I want to use the for each data row activity in UiPath. We'll move on to the next data set. So go to 2 cats. It's very similar to the first one called 1 dogs. Again, we will create the automation that finds out which one of these cats are now seniors. But we will not use the Excel activities, that is the for each Excel row, we will use the for each data row now. So go back to UiPath. We will create a new sequence because this one we will save. This UiPath file, I'll make it available in the files below as well. So go up here to new, then click sequence. We will give it a name. I will just say for each data row because that's all it is now. Then I click create. So what we do here is that we have a new sequence for our mission. We will again try to find out which one of these cats now that are seniors. First, we will use the read range to read the Excel sheet into a data table because this is a data table use case now. Go down to activities. Here you will find a read range. Maybe I could be a little bit more specific to reduce the number of activities. Choose the one under workbook, that is this one, and drag it in. Here we need a workbook path, we need a sheet name, a range, and some settings. Let's start one by one. The workbook path, well, that is still this Excel book, so I shift right click, copy as path. Then I go back here. What I want to tell you, it's always best practice to make a variable instead of just hard coding in this path here. If I did this and this would change, I would need to go into each one of the activities with this path in and change it manually. It's much better to use a variable. So let's do that. So delete it again. Still in here, press Ctrl K and I'll say str Excel path like this, press enter. The variable is being created. So if I go down here to variables manager, I can see it. In the default, simply just paste in your path now. And if this one change it and say I use it 3 times, I can just use this name and change it once down here in the default value. So what this is simply just a variable with a value. And it's the value of the path, so exactly the same as before. Nothing has changed except this is better practice. Then we will need to reference to the sheet. So which sheet do we want to read into a data table? And let me stress, a data table is nothing but an Excel sheet in the memory. It has rows, columns, it is an exact copy of this. It's just a data table that only exists when the robot runs. It has the huge advantage that it's very easy to do data operations on, for example, Excel sheets. So often we want to skip the Excel activities and use these data table activities. For example, this for each data row. But now we want a sheet name. So right click here, click rename, then copy it, and we can put it in over here in these quotation marks, 2 cats. Then we want the range, and I just want everything, so I delete everything that's in here. That's it. Now make sure this add headers is ticked. It is per default, and we have headers up here. So we're reading it into something. Now we need to define the output. That is a data table. So go over here in output, press Ctrl K and call it something. I'll call mine DT cats. It doesn't matter what you call it. I just call it DT to have a good indicator of what the variable type is. That is a data table. And then I give it a descriptive name, DT cats. But you can put in whatever you want. So now we have this read range. We have read it into a data table. Now we can again start using the for each row. This time for each row in data table. So I'll find a for each row in data table here and drag it in. Again, we are referencing to the current row. This is just a name for reference. So whenever we are in a row, we can reference to this current row to target the data in it. So for each current row in, and now I can put in my data table like this, DT cats. So we're iterating through this data table up here. Now we can ask a question like we did before. We want to know which one of these cats that are older than 10, and then we will have a yes here in this senior fields. So again, we'll find an if asks the question, and based on the answer, if that click the show else here, so it asks a question up here in the condition. The then branch, that is the true, and the else is the false. So now we can ask a question. We will ask the question very similar to before, but let's just write it out again. So we will target the current row from up here. So if I press Control space, that is the current row. Then I'll say dot. Again, we will have the item, that is the column name. So if I press parentheses and then quotation marks, I can write in the column name. Here I want to look at the H column because I want to know whether these fields one by one is bigger than 10. That's it. Now I can convert this H to an integer because now it's an object and we want to compare it to a number. And to do so, I'll just type in C in here like this. Then I have parentheses start and a parentheses end. So now we have the age in an integer and it is dynamic, so one row by the other. Then I'll say, is that bigger than or equal to 10? Then that's the question, that is a condition. If it is, I want to have a yes over here in the senior column. That is, I don't use the else branch again. I click hide else. So what do I want to do now? Instead of a write cell, I can use an assign. And that comes back to what I told you before. Data tables are very easy to work with in UiPath, and that's why we prefer it. So if I go up here, I can just drag in the assigns from favorites. And in case you don't have it there, simply just search for it. Drag it in. So what do I want to assign? I want to assign, so we are iterating through each row and we're referencing the current row as, current row. And I want to write into the senior column of the current row if this age is older than 10. That's why we are here in the then branch. To do so, I'll again press Control space. Then I'll have the current row. I'll say dot. Then I'll say item. Parentheses start. And now, because we want to write into the senior, I'll have the quotation marks and then I'll say senior. That's it. What I want to write, that goes over here on the right side, that will just be in quotation marks again because it's a string. I'll write in yes. And again, do remember, now it could look like we are finished, but it's only a data table. So this data table that we are updating here, that will get deleted right after the robot ends, or actually when the robot ends. So we need to, so because we read it into a data table and we did operations on this data table, we can now write the altered data out to this very Excel sheet. So go over to activities and then find a right range. There you go, we'll have the right range. Make sure that you're putting in the right range outside the for each loop, so you only write it once. A good trick is to mark this for each row in data table. You can see this blue border. Make sure the right range are outside. So the workbook path, we will use the same workbook path as before. Now it's convenient that we have the strxl path. So I'll just say strxl path. Then we want the sheet name. You could argue that we should have created a variable for this. So why not do that? So cut this, Control X, and then press Control K, str, sheet name, like that. Go down to variables. And then str sheet name, we will put it in here as 2 cats. That's fine. Now we can use it here. It's whenever you discover these mistakes that is in your automation, we all make them, simply just correct them and you're good to go. So here we have the sheet name. And instead of this in quotation marks, I just paste in, I just press Control space. I'll say str sheet name, like this. So now we have variables for both of them. Here we are starting in A1. I usually just delete this and then if I want to start elsewhere, I put in the cell I want to start in. Now I can define the data table and mine was DT cats. That's where I want to write to. Then I put in add headers. My data table has headers. We're good to go. So what happened now if I click debug, you watch. Then it will say that this is in use. So now we can't use it anymore because we use the workbook activities. We could use the Excel activities in UiPath and then still have the workbook open. But now I will save it and close it and stop it and try once more. So I click debug file. The automation runs. Let me open up the data here on my desktop. Now you can see that the senior column got updated. That's it. Fine. Hey, is this video helping you? Please give it a thumbs up. That will really help my channel and me a lot. Thank you. So now we have run through the for each Excel row and the for each data row. Let's talk about other types of collections that could be arrays, list, IEnumerable, and such. For that, we go to UiPath. Let's create another sequence. So I click sequence here. Then I can say other for each, and then I click create. It doesn't matter with the name, that is just for better referencing. So what I want to do here is to introduce you to another for each. So not the for each Excel row, not the for each data table row, but just the for each. Click the activities down here and then find a for each. You will have it down here and drag it in. This does exactly like the other for each loops. It iterates through a collection. Before we iterated through a collection of data rows, now we will take an array. So we'll say for each item, again, this is just a reference, feel free to change it. So we can start iterating through a collection. So if I go over here and put in, now I want to create an array. So I'll put in curly brackets like this, and then I put in some integers. I'll say 1, 3, 13, 8, 2, 5. This is my data set. If you can see what these numbers are, they are now in a slightly different order. Let me know in the comments. You'll know if you know. So make sure the properties is enabled over here, because it's very important in for each loops that you change the type argument. Always do that. And since we are having integers, change it to that. So now we are iterating through integers. We can ask a question. So now I want to know which one of these numbers is greater than 4 and what the position is in this array. Again, we ask a question, so I'll find an if here and drag it in. The condition, that is simply just, is the item bigger than 4? That's it. Then we go to the then branch. We will not introduce the else branch. We introduced it previously. Go back if you missed that part. So now we have the then. I'll just make a write line. Usually we use a write line for debugging while we create our robots. I'll never use it in the final robots, but they are really good here. So I'll find a write line and drag it in. What I want to write out now. I want to write out the number and then I want its position. So to write out the number, that is easy. That will just be the item. I'm referring to the current item up here, item, and then to string, because it's an integer, we want to convert it to a string. Then I can have some easy text so people can understand what they are doing here. So I'll say has the position and then spaces in between. Now go outside. And this one can get, it's hard to see. So a good trick is to go over here in the properties, click the 3 dots. Now it's a little bit bigger. So what you're doing here is just say item to string, then a plus, then another string, and we can write in strings. It's only strings here in the right line, so make sure it's strings, either with using the 2 strings or having it in quotation marks. So now we want to have the position. A nice way of getting the position in the array, and that is control space again, array like this, then dot. Then we'll have the index of, like this, parentheses start. And then we can put in our array. But now you see that if we put in this array, we could, of course, we could do it. And we could have the curly brackets, then 1, 3, 13 and stuff like that. That will be quite of a mess. Then that's why we now will create a variable for this array up here. So let's just click OK. It will save. It has an arrow. That's fine. So go up here to your array and cut it out. Then the easiest thing is not to create it up here. Now but go down to variables and then click create variable. I will call mine ARR numbers. Then in the default value, paste in the array from before. Now we need to change the variable type, so click the drop down here. Then choose the array of T. Then we want to tell UiPath what type is the variables that we have in our array. Ours were integer, and that is the default int 32. I'll click OK. That's it. So now we created the array. We can use it up here, ARR numbers, like this. Now we just need to fix this right line down here. So I click the 3 dots. So index of control space, there you go, array numbers, that's it. And then we want to have the item, the reference. So if I press comma here, I'll just say item. So I'll ask, I have a current item, and then I'll ask what position is that in this array of numbers. And then I need to convert this to a string to use it in the right line. That's it. I click OK. And now I can run the automation. So if I just click run file here, you'll go to the output. You can see 13 has the position 2, 8 has the position 3, and 5 has the position 5. Let's see if that was right. That looks about right. We have these 6 numbers, and remember it's 0 index, so 5 has position 5. It's right. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And similarly, 13 should be at position 2, and it was, and 8 was in position 3. That is all fine. We could have gotten this a little bit easier, because let me introduce you the indexed number of for each loops. If I click this for each, then you'll see an index. This index is simply just the number of each iteration. So if I go in here and press Ctrl K, I can say it index and press enter. Now for the first iteration, that will be the first number in the array. This one will have number 0 and so forth. So exactly like we did before. Go down to the right line, click the 3 dots here. So instead of all this, we can just delete this, and then we can use the int index. So there you go. This one will work, and it's much, much easier. And now we took a look at what the index output is of a for each. Let us run it again. There you go. And if I click the output, let me try it again, you will have your output fine there. Before we jump to the very nice use case with nested for each loop, let's look at the common confusion, that is what is a for each loop and what is a while loop. You just saw different example of for each loop. Let's take a while loop. You can argue that while loop is the only loop here, but that's another discussion. So let's create a new sequence. So I click new, then I click sequence, and this one will be called for each versus while. Now we will build a while loop. And this is just to show you the difference. If I go down here to activities, now I will just make a simple game where I'll ask the user to pick a number higher than 100, and then I'll verify that he or she actually did it. So that is, I'll run this process over and over until the user picks a number higher than 100. I'll use an input dialog. There you go. I'll take the input dialog and drag it in. I don't need a title, but let's just put in a label. So in quotation marks, I'll say pick a number higher than 100. You could argue that you don't need this either. So then I highlight it again, open the properties to see if we have some properties that we want to use. Now, the only thing that we want to use, that is the value entered, because we want to save this user input into a variable. It's always saved into a string. So if I go down here, press Ctrl K, I'll say str, and then I can call it something. I'll just call it str number, like this. So now we have the user input. It will look like this. Let me just run it here. And if I go down here and click here, you can see that I pick a number higher than 100. Nothing will happen, because if I click 5, then the execution stopped. That's all there is to it now. let's make a while loop that checks if the user actually picked a number higher than 100, else we want to continue this activity over and over. So in activities, I'll find a while and drag it in. So here we go. So again, this is a string and I need to convert it into an integer. And to do so, in the condition here, I'll say cint, and then I will have the str number like this. So now convert it into an integer. And I want to ask, so is this smaller than or equal to 100? Then I want to do something. Because a while, it comes in here and then it takes the condition. Then it asks this condition, and again, this condition can be answered with true or false. If this condition is true, then it will perform the body activities, and when it has performed this, it will evaluate on condition again. So then it will ask, is this condition true? Yeah, then we'll perform this again over and over. Therefore, when you build these automation in your company, it's always nice to have some sort of a stop here, so it can't continue forever. That is, maybe make sure that it can only run 100 or 1,000 times. I know a person that worked in a bank in Denmark, a very large bank. He actually made sure that they couldn't process any money for an hour in that company because he made a while loop that got out of control, and that is a true story. But so what we want to do here is that simply we will just ask this question again. So if I copy it here and paste it in the body, there you go, there's our automation. So because we're asking this question, and if the user has picked a too low number, then he will get this input dialog over and over. Let's try to run it. Instead of this debug, we could also run the file, but debug is fine. So, and let me get up this input dialog. So if I put in 5, we can see this input dialog comes up again. I can put in 10, and now let me put in 1,000. There you go. We have created our while loop. So the difference between a for each loop and a while loop is that a for each, that iterates through a collection, and a while loop is actually a loop that runs over and over based on a condition. The last part is a nice use case that will take you through for each row, not once but twice. That is a nested for each loop. It's very, very important to understand this and the concepts around it. So simply go through with me. I'll hold your hand. We will take it really slow and then we will sort it. So what we want to do now is to go back to our Excel sheet and then click the tree in common that is blank. We want to write out so we want to check these dog names, and we want to check if these dog names appear in the cat names. Then we want a mark in this match here. We will have a yes, and then we want to write this range here out to in common. So that is, and I can tell you that Cola and Freya, if we go back here, no, Cola and Eleanor, those ones are in common. We want to match there and there, and want the right range to in common sheet. By the way, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. That will really help me a lot. Now let's get started with the for each row nested. So if I go here and then I click new sequence, then I can say nested for each loops like this, and I click create. Now first thing is that I want to read both the dogs and the cat sheet. So in activities, I will find a read range. Make sure you pick the one on the workbook and drag it in. So the workbook path, that is again this one out here. So if I shift right click, copy as path, and then go back. Let's create a variable for the workbook path. So go down to variables, I'll call it str, then I can say Excel path like this and paste it in over here. That's it. So now we have the Excel path as a variable. It's best practice, but we will use it a couple of times, so it's really, really nice. So if I say str Excel path, I have my path. Here we will use this variable with the value in it. Again, make sure the properties are enabled over here so we can always inspect it. So what sheet do we want to read? I want to read first the doc sheet. So if I click here, I can say rename and then I can copy it, go back. We will not create a variable this time. I'll just create it in quotation marks, but feel free to create variables for the sheet names as well. So in here in the range, I'll just delete it. I will read everything. We will output it to a data table. And to do so, I'll create a data table with the control K. That one will create a data table. I'll say DT, then I'll say docs and press enter. That's it. So now I have read this Excel sheet into a data table. And again, a data table is just an Excel sheet that only exists in a memory. Or it's a collection of rows with columns just as an Excel sheet. So I just want to read the cats as well. And it might be a little bit more easy to Control-C, copy, Control-V, paste it in, and then just change accordingly. Because we want to read the str Excel path again. Now it's just 2 cats. So I can change it here, or again copy paste it like this. Over here in the output, let's delete it, press Control K and say DT cats like this. So now we have read our data into data tables. We can now start comparing them. So we will take each row of the doc table, and that is this one here. We will take each one of these. This is the first one. And then for the first one, we will go to the cat sheet and look, hey, is the name here? No, then this, then this, then this. And let's say we find it. We will say, yes, it's here. Then we will stop going through this second sheet here. We'll go back and write there's a match for Ash, and then go on to the next one. That is Batwoman here. Let's create it in UiPath. So it's not very, very complicated this. We'll only use a few activities, but make sure you understand what's going on. So I'll find a for each row in data table. So for each row in data table, that is here. We just use it, so I'll drag it in here. So first we're iterating to the docs. So for each current row in DT docs, that's it. So what we want to do here is that we have for each row in these, then we want to iterate to the cats. So let's drag one more in and it will be inside here. A good practice is you can see that we're referencing the same current row here, current row here. So delete the row and just call it line. It doesn't matter, but it's better for reference. And now I want to iterate to DT cats. That's it. So remember, we take one row at a time in DT docs, and then we'll check if it's present in the cats. So we need some sort of a variable that can change if we actually find a match. So let's create it in variables. So I go down to variables and I create a variable called bool, and I can call it bool match. It will be a boolean. A boolean can only take 2 values, true or false. Then I click minimize. And now you can see we have 2 bodies here. And because this variable bool match is the scope is body, it can be a little bit complicated. And to not confuse yourself, we can actually rename this. So double click. So this one is body outer, and this one, and this one here is body inner. Like this. Because now we can go to the variables. That is the bool match, and we can see that it is defined in body outer. So what happens here is that each time that we take a row, it gets resetted. So that is because it's defined in body outer, it gets reset each time we go in here. And per default, a boolean is false, so it's false going in. And if we find a match here, we want that variable to change to true. So let's ask a question in here. So we'll find an if. Again, we ask questions with if. So now I want to look at the name in this one here in the docs. And if that is equal to the name that I'm iterating to in cats, then we have a match. So to do so, let me press Control Space again. So I want a current row, because that was the doc we're referencing to here, current row in docs, like this. And then we want to tell UiPath which column we want to look at. We want to look at the name column. So that is start, then item, that is column, parentheses, quotation marks, name, like this. Then we convert it to a string, like this. Now we can ask, is this one equals to the name that we have in the current line in DT_cats? So that is equal to, and we'll say current line, because now it's DT_cats. Then we'll say item, quotation marks, we'll say name, again to string, like this. That's it. So now we ask a question. So that is, we're taking each one of the rows in DT docs and see if we can find it in cats. Let's say we find one. Then we will change our variable first. So we'll find and assign. There you go. Drag it in. So we will change the bool match that we just created to the true value. Now we know that we found a match. We can break a for each loop. That one is also a new activity that we haven't talked about, but let's say that we suddenly want to break. We don't need to iterate through more rows in the DT_cats because we have found a match. We know that there's a match, so we'll take a break. This one will just break out the first for each that it met, and that is the inner one. So now we go outside. And this is actually a bit difficult just to comprehend if it's first time you're seeing, but it's really simple. This will help your automation building a lot. So now we are in the body outer. And this could, being here could mean that we have either found a match or we haven't. And now we can assign value to our match cell based on the value of the bool match. Because if the bool match is true, then we found a match, we will assign the value. If it's not true, then we will do nothing. So go down here. So make sure you are in the body outer and not in the inner for each row. That's it. Then we will ask a question again. Yeah, a lot of questions. That's what for each loops are all about. So I'll drag in an if. Make sure you are in the correct place. That one will be here. So now I'll say, is the bool match equal true? Then we do something, because then we will assign a value to the match cell of the docs. So find and assign. There you go, drag it in. Here I will say current row, so I'll say current row like that. I'll say item, then I'll say in quotation marks, I'll say match. Then I can just say in quotation marks, I'll say yes. There you go. So we just need one more thing, a very simple thing. We need to write out the data. We will do it once and make sure you are outside both of the for each loops this time. So again, scroll down, that is all the way to the end. Find a right range and make sure you take the one in workbook activities and drag it in. So where do I want to write it to? I have the workbook path as a variable. So again, control space, I can see it here, strxl path. The sheet name, that one will be the in common. So right click and then copy it over here. Instead of sheet 1, I will paste in 3 in common. Again, delete the range. The data table that we want to write out to, well, we're writing to the DT docs here. We're writing to the current row. That's the one we're updating it. So, and that's the one we are evaluating on. So we take the docs and then we look at the cats and we want to update the docs sheet. So that one will be the DT docs, like this. Remember to add headers because we have headers. Now we can close this Excel sheet, this one, and we can run our automation. So our robot starts, it completed. Let's see if it has the right data for us. So if I go to in common, there you go, Cola and Eleanor, and that is true. If you also want to find which things they don't have in common or every value that's in there, I created a video for you. Just click the video in the middle to get the full use case of that. That will be a lot of nested for each loops. We like it.